The genesis were a series of hearings both on science and technology and on the Homeland Security Committee, on which I serve on both. And what we discovered very alarmingly was that most federal networks at all agencies, including the Pentagon, have been hacked into, and enormous amounts of data have been stolen in phishing expeditions and these espionage. And it was very alarming to know that actually, the Pentagon, the Congress, the White House, all agencies, justice, have been hacked into. NASA, and the list goes on and on. So we wanted to develop a bill that would better protect the federal networks. It's really the first cybersecurity bill we've had come out of the Congress in quite some time. And what it does is several things. It provides research and development dollars to a sort of a public-private consortium, if you will, with the federal government, universities, and the private sector to better protect these networks. It also provides the National Institute for Science and Technology, NIST, to provide standards within all the federal agencies, which we currently don't have. And then lastly, it provides for a scholarship program for technology workers to develop a cyber workforce in the federal government, and after they get their training and education, they pay for that by federal service, within the federal government. So, we're hoping that this will be a good first step to better protect our federal networks, which I think a lot of people don't realize are extremely vulnerable right now.
Well, Congressman, let's talk about NIST for a minute, because they have a very extensive program of standards and the special publications that they're constantly updating that's available to federal agencies. Would your bill make it tighter connection with agencies so that they would have to adopt those standards, seeing them as voluntary now? Is that the point of the legislation?
Yes, I think it's to standardize it across the board with all federal agencies, which is, well, you're right, they have in a handbook, it's hardly implemented, and this would ensure that these standards are implemented across the boards, across all federal agencies, to better protect our federal networks. It's a serious issue. When you talk to some of our top military experts, they'll tell you one of the greatest threats that we have right now is cybersecurity. Of course, DoD and NSA get more into the cyber warfare aspect, which is of real concern. But what we found is that on the defense side, in terms of defending the federal government and federal networks, DHS is supposed to be in charge, but really no one knew who was in charge. And so, that's probably a whole other issue we could address, but the idea of defending our networks from not only espionage, but from potential denial of service attacks, which we saw come out of Korea last July 4th. There have been several, we saw Russia do that with Estonia. But the idea of a denial of service attack on the federal government obviously would cause grave damage, and that's something we want to protect against. I hope this bill is a good first step to getting that done.
Now, when you say we want to create scholarship programs, are you talking about people that are already working in the field in cybersecurity in the federal government, or are you talking about young students that are coming through school that might want to take this on as a career?
I think it's probably more designed for young students, but I think obviously federal employees that want to get the training and education in technology to develop that cyber workforce, I think they would also qualify as well. But I think it's probably more designed to people in the universities currently who would want to study in these fields and then pay for it through public service.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you also about the issue of the Cybersecurity Coordinator in the White House. I think there's other legislation that's competing with yours that would elevate that job to where it reports directly to the president. What's your feeling on that job and how effective it can be in helping this whole cyber issue?
Well, you're right. The bill that came out of Science and Technology doesn't address that particular issue. However, I was co-chair of the CSIS. They did the Iraq Study Group, but we also formed, myself along with Congressman Jim Langevin out of Rhode Island, a nonpartisan commission to make recommendations to the next president of the United States. In this case, it was President Obama. And so we made our recommendations. We had some of the top cyber experts in the country on this commission. One of those recommendations was to elevate this position to the White House for the reason that I talked about earlier, and that was that there was no coordination amongst the agencies in terms of cybersecurity, and that nobody had a clear line of authority of being in charge. And so we believe that elevating this spot to a White House position, and the important thing is that person has to have the requisite authority to carry out the mission. I know that the president has come forward with actually a very good candidate for this position. The only concern I have is whether that position has been elevated high enough where they'll have the authority to go to the DoD and NSA and be able to carry the mission out, be able to be taken seriously.
We're talking this morning to Congressman Michael McCaul about the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act. Now, this has passed the House, and it had an overwhelming majority concurring with it. What about the Senate? What is its fate there?
I feel very optimistic that we'll be able to get it through. The Senate's its own animal, and they move on their own time frame. But I will say that in a day of such intense partisanship and acrimony, that I thought one of the most refreshing things I've experienced on the House floor was just the complete bipartisanship when it comes to an issue where we should come together. And I think the American people want and deserve that. And when you're talking about science and technology and national security, those are elements that we should all be able to work together, Democrat, Republican. And that's what we saw on the House floor. A lot of praise coming from both sides of the aisle, congratulating members on the other side of the aisle. And quite honestly, in the 3 terms I've been in the Congress, I've never seen anything like it. And I think it says a lot about the issue and how much strong bipartisan support there is for it. So therefore, I think passage through the Senate I hope will take place this year.
Yeah, for that matter, Congress itself has been the subject of some pretty frequent cybersecurity attacks. I think it was Congressman Frank Wolf of Virginia was hacked pretty badly, and information was taken out of his systems, and we've seen this. So would you find a way to extend it to the congressional branch, this mandatory standards use?
Well, I would think the NIST standards, because it applies to all federal networks, should, and that's a very good question, because I know Frank, his computers were hacked into. There have been other cyber attacks into Congress, and in fact, the entire data dump that's been performed on the federal government equals the size of the Library of Congress. That puts it in perspective, and that is an enormous amount of information that's been stolen by, obviously, countries that don't have our best interest at heart. And again, it's really 3 layers. There's the criminal element to all this, of the hackers stealing intellectual property. There's the espionage, element that is mainly from Asia. And then there's the cyber warfare piece, which to me is the most frightening, but probably less likely. But that's something that down the road we want to avoid another. Before 9/11, there were a lot of warning signs leading up to September the 11th. What we want to avoid here is we have seen warning signs of denial of service attacks out there. We want to avoid a similar kind of cyber 9/11 happening in this country.
And that's been a subject of discussion when Congress has been debating this whole cybersecurity initiative, or the cybersecurity center that's going to be developed by the Department of Defense. There's a question about whether there should be some retaliative strategy that we have against people that are attacking our networks. Has that been a communication that you've had as well, and what's your feeling on it?
Well, I think the key is being able to, once an attack has taken place, be able to tie it back to a certain network system, a certain computer, where, and that's very difficult to do. There's what they call the bots herder and the botnets. In the Korea case, we're still trying to find out the bots herder, the lead computer that was sending out messages that shut down all the other computers to cause a major denial of service attack. And then you have to find out, well, is the operator behind the computer, what was their motivation? Were they operating on behalf of a rogue nation or a state, so that therefore it is an act of warfare. That's the problem with cyber. You can do it so anonymously and so maliciously that it's oftentimes hard to pin down who is behind it. And one thing, we had a classified program that was declassified, so I can talk about it, but it was the Aurora project, where through the click of a mouse they were blowing up power grids. And so obviously that kind of capability in the wrong hands could do extraordinary damage in this country.